Another YouTuber has been accused of a bunch of terrible things, so let's not waste any time. Of course, we're talking about the situation involving Kwite. Kwite is a large commentary creator with almost 2 million subscribers and an affinity for not showing his face. And the situation all started on February 22nd, where an artist by the name of Orion made a post filled with accusations concerning their past relationship with Kwite. And after weeks of silence, Kwite released a 91-minute response to said allegations on March 11th, that calling thorough would be the understatement of a lifetime. To keep this organized, I'm going to go over the accusations from Orion first and provide Kwite's response to these accusations when appropriate, and then go over everything else surrounding the situation after. So let's get started. The post details what Orion described as a toxic friendship / on and off relationship with Kwite over the last 6 years that has included one instance of severe SA. I can't say the word because of certain policies, but you get it. Orion befriended Kwite during the latter's early days on YouTube, and according to the post, Orion wanted to do art for Kwite and helped him develop his persona of wearing a mask and sunglasses since Kwite didn't wish to show his face. Orion also drew several talk sprites for Kwite to use in his videos for free, though Kwite never really used them. Kwite responded to this accusation by providing proof of him using this persona before his friendship with Orion, and by showing messages of him attempting to compensate Orion for their art.
It reads to my biased self as more instances where he felt he was owed credit for some part of my success.
And according to Orion, initially Kwite and Orion bonded largely through their shared mental health issues, though according to Kwite, this wasn't the case. He says Orion would use him as a crutch for their mental health struggles, while Kwite kept his mental health struggles to himself for much longer.
Orion's pattern of oversharing personal and intense topics started in our earliest conversations. In comparison, the time it took me to open up about personal issues was much longer, after I had already been through multiple of Orion's vulnerable moments, and often only in response to Orion describing these same issues first, in an effort for me to try and show him he wasn't alone in what he was going through.
This was supported with messages. Anyway, due to the nature of Orion's work as an artist, they claimed they were making more contacts in the creator space than Kwite was. They say Kwite responded to this by asking Orion to include him in this networking, though Kwite making these contacts marked a shift in their relationship, at least to Orion, who described their friendship as transactional from this point. Kwite responded to this by saying that Orion was the one typically making their friendship feel transactional, showing messages of Orion repeatedly offering him things in return for Kwite doing things he was hesitant to do, or alternatively, insisting that Kwite owed him something because of something Orion had previously done. Orion then talked about struggling from mental health issues and feeling taken advantage of as a result of these issues, saying that Kwite would alternate between indifference, aggression, tenderness, and love in order to keep Orion in his life to the capacity that best served Kwite. Kwite responded to this claim by saying Orion was specifically choosing to attribute everything he ever did to the worst possible motivation.
But here it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. When I wasn't speaking with or replying to Orion, it means I was playing off his abandonment issues. But when I saw him in what seemed like severe distress and dropped whatever I was doing to try and support him, then I'm manipulating Orion by only being there for him at his worst. And trying to counter his negative self-talk is now love bombing, praise that I'd only lather on when I wanted something from Orion. On the whole, it didn't matter if I was present or not. In hindsight for Orion, there was nothing I did right in any situation.
Because he frequently felt that distance between them was best for him, but he felt obligated to help Orion, who at one point he allegedly had to talk down from suicide. Orion goes on to say this included Kwite taking advantage of their memory issues in order to gaslight them. Specifically, Kwite would keep their conversations on Skype, which automatically deletes messages after a set period. And he also strongly preferred talking via voice chat. So if Orion recalled something that Kwite said, Kwite would have deniability of ever saying it. Kwite denied using Skype for this purpose, saying he preferred using it because it had video chat, which Discord did not yet have. He also clarified that Skype didn't delete messages unless someone manually did it, and he actually published all of their Skype conversations that he had access to. He also showed multiple instances of Orion being the one to initiate voice chats because he was the one that would usually reach out to Kwite. Eventually, their friendship developed to them meeting in person. At this point, Orion told Kwite their dead name, but requested that Kwite only use it in front of Orion's parents, who weren't aware that Orion is transgender. Kwite began to allegedly abuse this knowledge, using Orion's dead name as a means of belittling them. Kwite flatly refuses this claim. In fact, Kwite published every message between him and Orion that he said he could get his hands on for public consumption, and there is no instance of him using Orion's dead name. In fact, one of the specific insults that Orion accuses Kwite of using is actually an insult that Orion had used on himself almost word for word. Anyway, back to Orion's post. According to Orion, Kwite established a rule that no pictures were to be taken of him, though he could have pictures of Orion. Eventually, Kwite allowed Orion to take some photos of him, which Orion kept to themselves. Now, according to Kwite, he didn't take photos photos of Orion during this trip, and he says that he was very private of his face at the time as an anonymous creator. He specifically points out that this fear was warranted, as there have been several instances of Orion doxing or leaking his face without permission, both in 2018 to friends and to the entire internet this month. Now for how Orion described the alleged assault. By their next meeting, the friendship had become more flirtatious, with them agreeing to be intimate together. However, once Kwite initiated, Orion described feeling uncomfortable and attempting to withdraw their consent, which Kwite allegedly did not honor. As Orion stated, he, however, did not want to take no for an answer. As Kwite proceeded, Orion kept telling him how this was hurting them and they didn't want to do this. And Orion states that Kwite responded, "This is what you wanted," numerous times. Unsurprisingly, Kwite outright refutes all of this. He points out that when Orion talked about this day in a previous attempt at defaming him in 2018, I'll explain more later, Orion didn't mention any kind of physical intimacy, but he was comfortable revealing a ton of other private details between them. Kwite also reveals that he is still a virgin and shows messages of him identifying as such since the day in question. He also talks about suffering from performance anxiety that affected previous attempts at intimacy with his potential partners. He even shows messages of Orion seemingly poking fun at this anxiety. He says that nothing more ever happened between them other than a single kiss that Orion pressured him into. Furthermore, Kwite showed a lot of messages that showed Orion almost obsessing at the idea of intimacy with him and constantly bringing it up. And at times, Kwite would either reluctantly go along with it or deflect altogether.
And even at that point, Orion still wasn't taking no for an answer. He doubled down and said he was going to smooch me anyways. Nah, you can't dodge the smooch. It will find you and it will smooch when you least expect it. There is no dodging, only smooch. Maybe he meant that playfully, but I didn't respond to it because I was uncomfortable with the way he was talking to me.
Orion also claimed that Kwite forced them to buy Kwite popcorn to make up for the awkward interaction, which Kwite refutes by explaining that he was just starting to make money and developed somewhat of a complex about paying for his own stuff. And he shows multiple messages of Orion insisting that Kwite allow him to pay for things on his behalf. Orion then goes on to accuse Kwite of a lot of things that honestly come down to Orion stating what Kwite's intention behind certain events were, such as Kwite distancing himself due to ego, but Kwite said that it was because he found their relationship to be too taxing on himself. And a message that Orion leaked between them and a third party actually corroborated that claim, or that Kwite ignored them during a BPD episode, but Kwite had no idea that Orion suffered from this and never went longer than 3 days without responding. Anyway, Orion then claims that when they previously tried to come out about their experiences, they were harassed into silence by Kwite's fans. Now, Orion is talking about a video in September of 2018 that was a hit piece at Kwite that Orion took part in. Kwite, reasonably in my opinion, argues that it's not fair to bring up the bad reception to a video that Kwite never responded to or acknowledged publicly, though he disavows any harassment potentially done by a fan of his. And there's a lot more to say on that video, but I'll get to it. Now, according to Orion, he, quote, was able to set up a call to reconcile with Kwite. And in this call, Orion says that Kwite attempted to gaslight him and say that Orion assaulted Kwite, referring to Kwite saying that he was uncomfortable with Orion kissing him.
The assault Orion says I accused him of is in reference to me telling Orion and Danny that I was uncomfortable with that kiss.
YouTuber Lord Bung was also there to act as a mediator who apparently calmed Kwite down and had him apologize for some of his behavior. Kwite's response to this simply was that, yeah, he was angry in this call.
What set me off was that after I communicated that the kiss had made me uncomfortable, Orion denied it. And he said something to the effect of telling me that I was wrong and that we actually kissed more than once, saying that I had initiated it the second time. We did not do that. As I'm seeing it, Orion is lying straight to my face again about something incredibly sensitive to me. He's essentially told me that I'm wrong and I actually wanted it when we kissed, and that really I was into it so much that I kissed him again myself.
He says Orion lied about events between them on multiple occasions, constantly talked over him, and he was dealing with being in the middle of a literal hurricane, which added to his stress. Furthermore, Orion had just participated in the aforementioned hit piece against Kwite, where they publicly exposed his struggles with self-harm, which he had never talked about publicly.
I helped him through self-harm.
Kwite also points out that Lord Bung being a mediator was unfair, as Bung and Orion had and have a close friendship, partnership, and at times a relationship. Kwite even points out that Orion says Bung was ready to cut through Kwite's BS, meaning they were never an impartial mediator. Now that's everything from the initial post, but Orion has made a few statements since, namely that they have been diagnosed with PTSD, seemingly implying that it stems from this situation. Orion also told another creator that they haven't involved authorities due to the statute of limitations passing, as well as lack of evidence to convict. Orion claims to have been told the same by lawyers. It also stated that Kwite had too many resources to go against in court. Lastly, Orion accused Kwite of responding to the accusations by using a bot to delete all of the messages he sent them on Discord, which Kwite flatly denied, and once again responded by publishing their Discord messages himself. So that's really everything concerning Orion's initial post. But what did Kwite's video add to the situation? Kwite unpacked a lot of the reasons that he saw his relationship with Orion as toxic, going so far as to identify Orion as his abuser.
My abuser has managed to make a permanent mark on me in a way he's only gotten to do in private before, but now gets to share with the public.
He talks about Orion being codependent and their friendship being emotionally taxing. He talks about Orion previously participating in a video where he exposed Kwite's struggle with self-harm, which he had never disclosed publicly. And in that video and on Orion's private Twitter, they had actually threatened what they could do to Kwite with what they knew.
Because I had his phone number, as well as I'd met his parents, I had his address. I have a lot of secrets on him because we were best friends.
Some might say this could be in regards to something big that would ruin me, perhaps even the assault he claims I committed now. But by Orion's own account of things, both his old and his new one, that is impossible. The tweet was made about a week and a half after our call, and Orion said he didn't realize he had been raped until after the fact in his own twit longer. And he told people asking in DMs that it took a year with his current therapist to realize it as well.
Orion was also constantly pushing Kwite's boundaries,
And it's here where Orion crossed my boundaries in a major way. In the photos Orion leaked of my face, specifically the ones where we're at his house, you can see I'm not the one initiating contact in any of them. I'm hanging off towards the end of the couch and Orion is constantly leaning on me. When we sat down to watch Moana with Orion's dad in the room, Orion put his arms around me in a full embrace and I froze up. And he stayed leaning onto and hanging off me for the whole runtime. Again, Orion's dad is there through the whole thing, and he told me his parents were both physically and verbally abusive on the regular. I'm trying not to move a muscle or do anything that could be interpreted as me reciprocating or making a move because the dad is right there and I'm under the impression he's on a hair's trigger. Orion knew I was uncomfortable with this kind of contact. He knew his dad did not like seeing him do that with me. And it made me feel like I was being used as a tool for Orion to stick it to his father.
and making him feel like Kwite had to be there for Orion because Orion wouldn't be able to live without him.
I felt trapped, like there were no other options but to try and help this person whenever he asked, because otherwise I might be leaving him to die.
For example, Orion expressed jealousy towards Kwite because he had a good conversation on a podcast with another friend. Lastly, Kwite talked about how the situation has made him afraid to go outside now that Orion revealed his face with the accusations attached to it. Kwite expressed disgust at these accusations, saying he was a victim of SA on 2 separate occasions. He also says that he's considering leaving YouTube altogether as he just wanted to be a normal guy outside of his job, but thanks to Orion, that was no longer possible. Like, this video was the first time that Kwite ever showed his face by choice, and by choice is a stretch.
I don't know when or if I'll be back. I'm not entirely sure if this whole thing or the nature of this job is for me anymore.
And while originally the entire internet seemed to flock to Orion's side, the reception to this video has been universally positive. Kwite was even trending #2 in the country, and the top tweets were all in his favor. Specifically, he received praise for providing loads of proof, while Orion provided essentially no proof for anything other than the fact that the two used to be friends. And yeah, to say this doesn't look good for Orion would be a major understatement. They initially said that they would get around to responding when they can, but released a document that states that they were seen by a psychologist for an instance of SA in 2018. And Orion's replies were locked so that only people that Orion follows can reply, and yet their replies are filled with people accusing him of falsifying the document, showing that parts of it are copy and pasted from the internet, there are proofreading errors, etc. Now, I don't know about all that, I don't work for the FBI, but either way, even if this document was not forged, it's compelling evidence, but it is not undeniable proof by any stretch. And no matter what, it's going to be very difficult for Orion to provide something more compelling than what Kwite's put out when Kwite released literally every message between them that he could apparently get his hands on. And so that's where we are now, with the internet having done a complete 180 to believing Kwite, though Orion says he intends to respond, so who knows how that'll change things. And honestly, I'm left feeling the same way that I always do in a situation like this, which is tired. I really don't like seeing the internet be weaponized like this, and it just keeps happening. And I'm tired of the internet never learning that it is okay to wait and get a proper response before trying to ruin someone. You don't have to kick in someone's door like Batman the second they're accused of something. Like, Kwite lost 80,000 subscribers just in the time that it took for him to respond. And like Kwite said, even if he's proven innocent, these accusations are gonna follow his name until the end of time. There will always be people who believe them now, even if they never happened. All I know is whoever is lying in this situation is doing irreversible harm to future conversations about accountability, and that really does suck. And Kwite's video was incredibly thorough and a great example of why rushing to conclusions isn't acceptable. Accusations are serious. People need time to collect every instance of proof that they can. And I don't even have a joke to close with, because like, it just sucks that this is never gonna get better and seems like it's only gonna keep getting worse for actual victims, whether it's of assaults or false accusations, and the internet seems like it has no problem with that. So, hopeful note to end on, right? Bye!